Trung, thank you so much for joining us today. I really am really glad to have you here. Would love to hear a little bit more from you about what brought you to LinearB in the first place and why you decided that this was something you needed for your dev org.
Yeah. Thanks, David, for having me in here as well. Basically, about a year ago, we wanted to understand a little bit more about our engineering efficiency. We went down a path of building the tools against GitHub's API. Long story short, we decided to back off of that project. Around that same time, I started exploring different tools. I Googled engineering efficiency, engineering metrics, and landed on LinearB.
Oh,
And
that's
from
great.
there, I was able to just plug in the GitHub API, and an hour later, voila, I saw all my engineering metrics with focus on cycle time.
Mhm.
And that's really was the start of how I engaged with LinearB.
That's great. Whenever I talk to a new customer, I always try to find what is the low-hanging fruit? What is the first thing that we can really do to help you? And so when you came to LinearB and said, "All right, I want to do this," did you have like a key metric in mind that you wanted to move the needle on?
Yeah, absolutely. It was based off one of the Dora metrics,
Uh-huh.
deployment frequency, right? I want to understand like how do I improve that metric? What do I need to do? Where's the bottlenecks?
Uh-huh.
And I'll kind of start from there. And
Yeah.
then combining like what you guys provide on your site to learning, the different areas. I explore more about cycle time and
Yeah.
understand all the different phases behind that.
That's
Right.
awesome.
So,
Yeah.
and then just empowering my team to have data. In sprints, they're talking about where the bottlenecks are qualitatively, but like to add a quantitative data to that conversation has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's always the first part of like identifying those bottlenecks, right? And knowing, okay, this is where we are having a little pinch point in our process. But I think that next level, you guys have been doing a great job of really taking the data and then going beyond and saying like, okay, what do we do to improve this moving forward? I'd love to know from you when you found those pinch points along the way. What were the changes you made and how did that improve your process?
Yeah, absolutely. We can zoom into cycle time, right?
Yeah.
Beginning of the first PR commit to production release, right? And just understanding going from code to a review, like a pull request review being picked up to the review to deployment, right? So
Hmm.
when we zoomed into where our majority of our cycle time is, it's really in the PR pickup phase
Mm,
and the PR review. So the PR cycle time there.
right.
And really like understanding, okay, how can we improve that back and forth conversation, the idle time, really the part that makes the developer frustrating because they're waiting for
Right.
their stuff to be reviewed and picked up and they already moved on another piece of work, right?
Right.
So part of that process, we downloaded WorkerB,
Yeah.
right? And enabled that across our developers and they're all using it. And
Hmm.
now they're getting the full context about the PRs, notifications. And
Yeah.
that's really kind of moved the needle for our development team. They're not manually having to ping their teammates. They're understanding how long a PR is so that they can make decisions
Right.
when to do
Right.
that pickup.
Yeah. In your conversation earlier today with Dan, I think we talked a lot about this concept of idle time and how much of a PR's life cycle is spent just dead waiting for someone to pay attention to it. And I think, you guys have done a great job of really identifying that process and those troubled PRs. As you've done this, like what was your methodology for kind of building in this framework with your team, like encouraging them, this is the new way to go? Did you run into any kind of pushback or any kind of challenges to the new process, or was it a pretty seamless transition for you?
So when we first started out, again, this is set of alerts, right? So the
Yeah.
first thing people to ask is like, am I going to dominant with all the alerts popping in? But the beautiful part is you can customize which alerts you get,
Right.
to what extent, and then you can make it more team based as well as personal based,
Yeah.
right? So that's really helpful there in terms of they can configure what's helpful for their own team.
Yeah.
So we don't require every single alert to be on there. Each
Yeah.
team can may operate a little bit differently.
I think that's great. I think having a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of personalization, recognizing that it's not a one size fits all tool, right? You need to have the ability to kind of customize it to what your team is doing, what you guys want to see, and not be inundated with yet another Slack alert.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also team goals was something
Yeah.
that was rolled out. And I found that very helpful because it got the team excited. They
Yeah.
got a baseline to see where they're at, but they can also set a particular goal around, hey, keep my PR small under 200 lines of code.
Yeah.
And they're actually shot for that,
That's
right?
great.
Yeah. So
Did you see any kind of like friendly competition between teams, like trying to one up each other?
there was definitely elements of that, but you can imagine a leaderboard that we could build off this data at some point
Oh,
and
that'd be
really kind of
great.
put the team together in a friendly way.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Now you guys are doing some really cool things with our new tool with gitStream, and really changing the way you guys are kind of treating these different pull requests that are coming through. I'd love to know like some of the early changes that you've made to your PR review process using gitStream.
Yeah, absolutely. So with gitStream, we were able to take some basic non-functional code changes that's around formatting,
Hmm.
also code changes that are basically just tests, right?
Yeah.
And essentially, I'll make it simple to auto merge
Hmm.
those, right?
Yeah.
Approve them or merge them straight into production, right?
Oh,
And
that's
that's
nice.
how it helped our team a lot. Another thing is also around like API changes. When we make
Mm.
those API changes,
Yeah.
we want to be able to route it back to the PR opener to let
Yeah.
them know, like, hey, this is outdated. Why don't you consider
Right.
this one, right? So a
Yeah.
bunch of this automation, you can set up different rules. We obviously done some of the simple ones where it's a low risk code change.
Hmm.
Just have those auto approve as well. But let's kind of think about this. What we're really looking at is like shifting left that PR process, PR
Right.
approval process,
Hmm.
but also like writing down the policies.
Right.
Because prior to this, we had teams who actually operate like this already to some level with like low risk PRs,
Right.
low risk code changes, but wasn't written down, wasn't a policy.
Right.
So now our developers actually know when they jump into this code base, what's the best way to get their PRs through the door.
I think that's great. I think being able to come in and document these processes early on, because FloSports, I mean, you guys are a growing company. Being able to see where you're going to go from here and saying like, no, we've got this documented. We have a policy in place, and it's not just kind of an ad hoc thing. It's now a documented way to go for everybody that comes after you.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that. I
Absolutely.
love that. I wanted to touch on what you talked about earlier around kind of the outdated APIs, because I think that's a use case for the tool that I hadn't really thought about a lot before. But you know, you go through all this work and have somebody review, and then just to realize like this PR I've got, I can't do anything with. Like you're using an outdated API. There's no reason for me to move forward with this. And now you've wasted their time. It's going back and forth. Having that little bit of coding to go into the tool and saying, nope, go back, check your API. I love that.
Yeah.
Are you seeing some like positive reaction from your team as to like not have to deal with
Yeah.
those little annoyances as much?
Yeah, I love that you call that out. So one of the things that we're seeing is essentially when PRs come to a developer now,
Yeah.
it's more important because
Yeah.
they realize it's not dealing with those things that they could just automate,
Right.
right? So now they're just not simply ignoring it. So I think there's an element of that feeling.
Right. It's that whole like developer experience concept, right? Of like,
Yeah.
let's make their lives a little easier. Let's make it not so tedious. And I love that you're seeing some results with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
It's
great.
been fun.
So Trung, one area that is really important to me, because I work with our customer success org, is the process you guys go through in your onboarding process. Once you go from signing the agreement saying, yeah, I want to use LinearB, where do you go from there? How is it like working with a CSM to kind of onboard all of the different members of your team, train them on the value of these different tools, many of whom weren't necessarily in the room when you guys decided to purchase this new tool?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned our CSM partner, right? So I think that was like the key part of this
Hmm.
to bring in a CSM that can help us create some one pagers that I can easily send out to my team. And
Hmm.
as you understand, like it takes more than one type of communication, one more than one time to get the team sort of understanding what we're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish. So a one pager I send out, and then I use that with our engineering all hands. I've even brought in Sumitra, which I
Hmm.
love. She's one
Yeah.
of our CSMs to do a quick 10-minute overview of LinearB, WorkerB tools, and really how we can adopt that and how it resonates with the developers, right?
Right.
So leveraging the CSM at LinearB has been extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And then also working with my managers and team leads directly,
Right.
right? So that they understand this. And then ultimately, they're the ones that can communicate the tool and get the team to adopt it, whether it's in their sprint conversations, whether it's looking at retros,
Hmm.
really looking at data at the team level, and then getting them to basically like adding the team members, setting up the right rules, right? So that's how I kind of, and then a third thing is working directly with an engineer on an infrastructure team,
Hmm.
which is also a big part of the DX experience, and they're excited about it. So they're going to push up. So, we talk about gitStream, having one of our engineers really like set that up, deploy it out,
Yeah.
has been really beneficial.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think having that internal advocate, really being able to say like, this is why we're doing this and this is how it's going to help. It makes a huge difference. I think there's often this like, translation from the executive team that decides, yes, we're going to use this tool, to the actual devs, the team leads that are using it day to day, and how to incorporate it into their workflows. You mentioned you're using it for your retros now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How was that like incorporating that into that process? Because it's such an important part of the process. Bringing in a tool like LinearB, it's a whole new thing. So was this kind of an organic adoption? Did you guys push it to your team and say, hey, we want you to try this? Or were your devs saying like, hey, I kind of want to bring this to the table and use the data in our retrospectives?
Yeah, we have about 10 pods and 60 engineers. So you can find a mix of both, right?
Yeah.
Some teams kind of see this and they're like, oh, I want to give this a try. And organically, they just pull up the dashboard. They start entering their own team goals and they start talking about it in the retros like, hey, we didn't fully meet our percentage goal in terms of like, PR size, for example.
Right.
What can we do better, right?
Yeah.
And there's other teams where, hey, you just got to like nudge them a little bit, pull up pulse during your daily stand-up and look at, does someone have too much work in progress? Right. Kind of start seeing those bubbles along, and then they can start, oh, wait, maybe we should take care of this piece of work first before we move on to something else, right? So those conversations are happening, and I'm seeing those retro notes. That's how I know it's being used.
That's great. And I like the way you're talking about this because I've run into scenarios where people are wary of using Pulse, wary of using these tools because they're like, we don't want to micromanage our team. We don't want to make them feel like Big Brother. But I think the way you're talking about it is really much more about lifting them up and talking about, look at the success that they're having. Look at how we've had this goal and using LinearB, how they've hit their targets. I love that. I think that it's a lot more of a pleasant interaction and it's a lot less, oh, I'm worried about hitting my numbers. It's more like we did it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's like I said, it's part of our engineering all hands. We can have like hey, what's the goal for this month across all teams? Let's just try to make those PR smaller. And then let's observe, a lot of data from LinearB, it's a lagging indicator, but it's really good. Yeah. Because you can understand like what went wrong in the last couple of weeks, right? And you have a conversation about it.
Do you talk with your team leads and your devs about the impact of what you're doing now and how this may be a small change now, but this is why we're doing it. This is the big picture, and this is what we're hoping to accomplish at the end of the quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every time you kind of see like, hey, we can increase our merge frequency, and you multiply that by tons of epics, stories, hundreds of PRs. Now you start seeing that effect, right? You start seeing our merge frequency going up. You start seeing PRs going smaller. So it's not a single thing. It's a sum of many things that will produce that positive outcome they want. Less rework, faster communication between the different teams, the dependencies. So it's really everything together.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming in and taking the time to chat today. Any other like parting thoughts or things that you've loved about LinearB so far?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a certain set of features around the project planning that I want to explore more with the team, obviously tying that to the Jira data, and then really fully flushing out our DORA metrics, right?
Oh, yeah.
The MTTR, the change failure rate, deployment frequency. So those things I'm coming looking at. Explore more.
One last question. I know. I would love to know just with the data that you are getting from LinearB, how are you reporting that up to leadership, to your senior leadership team, to your board? Is it changing the way that you're going into these meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's becoming a transition for us, right? So historically, our leadership doesn't really fully understand what engineering efficiency looks like. So I'm actually working on building out things that I can bring data to the table with engineering leadership, with the business, right? And really to help them understand, like, how do we continue improving efficiency? Where do we invest? And what's the outcome of those things?
Yeah, that's great.
And we wouldn't be able to do that without the LinearB metrics.
That's fantastic. I love to hear it. And I can't wait to hear what you guys do with this next.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you, David.